All right, here we go. So we're going to solve this equation by factoring. The first thing I notice when I look at my equation is 2 will not go into each individual term. So that tells me I can't just factor out a 2. So the next thing I notice, since the 2 is in the front, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to use factoring by what is called grouping. Okay, so when you factor by grouping, the first thing you do is you take this coefficient and this coefficient and you multiply them together. So we take our 2 times 15 and we get, let me change this symbol from an X to a dot. So we use the 15, that's multiplication. So 2 times 15 is 30. And now I'm going to go back and look at my original equation and I'm going to check the signs. So we have a negative and a positive. So what that tells me is that when I'm factoring, I'm going to have a negative and a negative. If this is, and I'll go into this, and so that means I'm going to be subtracting my factors. So I'm going to look at my factors of 30. So the first factor of 30 is 2 and 15. If I add those two together, because we're going to be adding them together, that's going to be 17. That won't work. So 3 will go in 10 times. So 3 plus 10 gives me 13. And now this is what I'm trying to achieve, is 11. So now I'm going to try 4 doesn't go into 30 evenly, so then I'll try 5. And my 5 times 6 gives me 30. If I add 5 and 6 together, I get 11. And now I have my 11. Okay, and you'll see how the signs are going to work out as we work this out. So now I'm going to rewrite this by grouping it. So we're going to take the 2x squared and leave it alone. Then I'm going to take these two factors that I've just come up with and break this minus 11 down into these two factors. Now, when I break it down, I always start with the one of lesser value. So 5 is of a lesser value than 6. So I'm going to start with my 5 and minus 5x minus 6x. Now, if we add these two together, we get our 11x, a minus 11x. So that's what our goal is. We're reassigning this and we're breaking it down into this. And then we'll just keep the 15 and it equals 0. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group my my terms together. So my first grouping is going to be 2x squared minus 5x. And then my next grouping is going to be negative 6x plus 15. And then I'm going to put a plus sign in here because we're not multiplying our groupings together. We're just grouping them, regrouping how we're doing our symbols. This is why we had you learn about the associate property, the commutative property, and distributive property in the beginning, because when you have addition and subtraction, you can use different properties, and that's what we're doing. We're grouping these using those properties. Okay, now I'm going to look at my first grouping of 2x squared minus 5, and the only thing I can factor out of them is an x. And so what that's going to leave me with is, if I factor out an x of 2x squared, that's going to leave me with 2x. If I factor out an x of minus 5x, leaves me with a 5. Okay, so that's my first grouping. And then I'm going to work with my second grouping. And in this one, there isn't an x in both terms, but I could factor out a negative 3. And so when I factor out a negative 3 from the negative 6x, I wind up with a positive 2x. If I factor out a negative 3 from 15, that leaves me with a negative 5. Okay, so now take note that this and this is exactly the same. that was one of our goals, is what we wanted to try and do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor that out of this whole grouping here. I'm going to factor that out. So I'm going to say factor 2x minus 5. And when I do that, I'm left with x minus 3. Now, of course, all of these are equal to 0. I just didn't bring it down to all of them. Okay, now we have 2x minus 5 and x minus 3. And what we're going to do to get our factors is we're going to use the zero product property. So I'm going to take my 2x minus 5 and set it equal to 0. Then I'm going to solve for x. So I'm going to add a 5 to both sides. And that's going to leave me with 2x equals 5. Then I'm going to divide by my 2. And I'm going to have x equals 5 halves. Then I'm going to take my other factor, x minus 3, set it equal to 0. I'll add a 3 to both sides. And this one is quite a bit more simple. So we wind up with x equals 3. Now the thing that we need to do after this is we need to check our answer. And it is a bit of work to check the fraction out, but it works out quite nicely. So I'm going to do that one for you. So you go back to your original equation and you substitute in your factor. So my original equation was 2x squared, so I'm going to substitute my 5 over 2 in for my x. Then I come over and I have minus 11. And then I'm going to substitute my 5 over 2 in for my x. Now, the one mistake that I notice learners make is they forget to do it for every single x term that they have. And then the 15 doesn't have one, so we'll just do plus 15. And we're trying to see, is that going to be equal to 0? So let's work this out a little bit. I'll do blue here. So this becomes 2 times 25 over 4. I just squared the whole thing. Minus, and then I'm going to work this one through. So it's 55 over 2 plus 15. Is it still equal to 0? Let's work it out a little bit. So now I'm going to take my 2, put it over 1 so that I have it placed correctly. And I'm going to take 2 into itself 1 time and 2 into the 4 2 times. And so this factor is left to be 25 over 2 minus 55 over 2. And then we have the plus 15. Okay, if you minus 25 from 55, you wind up with 30 over 2. Okay, and it's going to be negative because the 55 is a greater value and it's negative. So negative 30 over 2 becomes negative 15. So we have negative 15 here. This becomes negative 15 plus 15. And yes, indeed, it does equal 0. So we have checked that factor. To check then you would do the same exact thing for the 3. I'm going to do that one up here on top. So we're going to have 2 times 3 squared minus 11 times 3 plus 15 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to put this in here because I'm working across. So this is 2 times 9. 2 times 9 is 18 minus 1133. 11 times 3 is 33 plus 15. And is that equal to 0? Yes, it does when you work it through.